Managed mentoring for getting started in beekeeping. This is Performing Hive Autopsies. I'm Kevin England. In this lesson, we will cover the process of how to perform a hive autopsy, also known more formally as a necropsy. We'll discuss how to get prepared, how to examine the scene, and how to comb through all the evidence from top to bottom. We'll also discuss considerations for examining the findings and recommend ways to analyze and document what presents from the inspection. Inspecting a colony that has perished is never a fun task. That being said, it can be cathartic as you try to learn what it was that took the colony down. And if you're pragmatic about it, you can see it as a learning experience in your body of knowledge for beekeeping. It is possible that a hive that has perished has something to tell you, and if you learn something that can prevent a future loss, that is definitely a worthwhile time investment. When it comes to looking at the task at hand, consider the time it might take and plan accordingly. Typically, you would want to do each hive from start to finish in one session. You should also consider whether you can do it right away, given how much time it might take, or whether you need a dedicated block of time to conduct the inspection. Whatever you choose, ensure that you close off the hive entrance so that nothing can come into contact with anything within the interior before you have determined that there is no risk to any bees that might get inside. Inspecting a colony that has perished is a process. From your first part of analysis to the final part, there are a large number of things you can take notes on. I might suggest that you apply two tactics as you go. The first is continually take notes as you work through the process. And secondly, pause periodically and take time to observe in the moment and capture your impressions. In the end, following this approach, you will have collected all the information required to step back, take it all in, and perform your final analysis. The takeaway here is the notes are a critical part of the process. Before you begin, take the time to refamiliarize yourself with the condition of the colony that was going into winter. Start with a clear and honest understanding of what the colony's state was before undertaking the review. One of the best places to start is with the basics. Capture the core information of what is known. I like to use a legal pad when doing this work, and I start by writing down the preliminary information that when I look back on at a later date gives me a sense of the makeup of the colony that was inspected. I then simply take notes about the observations, and when I'm done, I write any supporting information and finish with a summation of what was learned. Since varroa mites are such a concern, one of the key things I focus on are the dead bees present during the inspection, and especially what the results are when I sample those bees for varroa. Along with taking notes, photographs are super important. Post the activity, it's extremely beneficial to pull up and study photographs because there's so much to learn from them. It begs the guidance of telling you to take a little more care and getting the best photographs that you can. Pay attention to the subject that you're trying to capture and take an extra moment to get it right. Focus on the framing of the image, make sure it's proper, getting the right angle to capture whatever it is you see, and pay attention to the lighting of the scene. If the lighting is not well and you can't see what you're looking at, during a specific shot, move the hive, the equipment, the frames, whatever you're taking in a picture of to improve the light. Each time you do this activity and you spend time afterwards examining the photographs, you'll come to learn the ways to improve your shooting of the situation and how important the photographs are. You cannot ignore the fact that the colony may have perished from disease. As such, if live bees get into the colony, they could be exposed to elements that can cause harm, and they could transport it back to their colony. It is practical to instruct you to only open the hive for autopsies when bees are not flying. If you get to a period where the weather permits flight, then it might be best to transport the hive where it can be opened in a closed space and negate possible exposure to live bees. This has a possible side effect of disturbing the interior, but practicing good hygiene is the better way to go. The passage of time alters the appearance of the state of what's inside the perished colony, especially when environmental conditions change. The sooner you get to recognize the colony has perished and performing an autopsy, the better you will be to assess the situation. Dry winter days, shifts in temperature, complicated with wet, warm days that sometimes occur, change the atmosphere inside the hive equipment, and that leads to dried out bees, mold, mildew, and decay. This complicates your ability to read the situation. The quicker you can get in to perform a hive autopsy, the better off you will be. Be sure to consider proper hygiene as you work within a deadout. Harmful pathogens cannot be seen by the human eye. You want to clean any surfaces that come into contact with brood frames and any parts of the interior that you've laid around as you're doing your inspection. Don't forget to clean your hive tool and any other pieces of equipment you use during the operation. It's not a bad practice to consider wearing disposable gloves, and you should be sure that you wash your hands very well when you complete the task before you go in and do any other work with your hive equipment. Now let's talk about the physical inspection process. Starting with the hive as it sits in the apiary, take in the surroundings, record any observations of anything that seems to be off, review the equipment for any signs of damage or misconfiguration, and also take note of any evidence in and around the hive. One sign you might encounter is marking found on the exterior surface of a hive. When a deadout is robbed of honey resources, departing bees can leave errant tracks as buildup wherever the bees come and go. These are commonly referred to as robbing stains. Bees that are held in the interior for long periods of time may leave fecal deposits on interior surfaces and exterior surfaces when they can no longer hold what they're carrying as they move around. Sometimes you'll find fecal deposits across the outer exterior of a hive front face. They'll be on the roof and maybe even on the surrounding ground. There are times this finding could have something to do with illness within the community, especially if it's on the interior and is in abundance on the exterior of the hive. After you've taken note of the exterior surroundings, move through to make notes on the landing board and entrance. As this slide suggests, inspect the area with high scrutiny. Ensure to note whether or not the entrance was blocked or clogged or there were any moisture problems. After you look through the front entrance, you're going to perform a set of activities, an interior inspection from the top of the hive to the floor of the hive, and we'll be going through that next. Before pulling the roof, make note of how it's physically coming into contact with the top box. Check to see that it was placed properly, and if you had a top entrance, determine whether the roof was blocking that top entrance or causing any problems. Some beekeepers like to put a stick or ventilation rock underneath the front. Make sure that as you remove the roof, you look at what you had set up and make notes of the configuration. The last thing to do before you set your roof aside is look at the underside and see if there's anything interesting presenting there. Setting the roof aside, make your observations about anything you see while looking down on the inner cover. Again, note if there are any signs of moisture problems and anything unusual present as you scan the top. Make note of the inner cover and whether it is sealed to the top box and if there's any propolis present. Use a hive tool to remove your inner cover and inspect the underside. Once you've completed your notes, move on to the hive interior. This video assumes you're running a standard configuration, 2 deeps, 3 mediums, and after you remove the inner cover, you should be able to scan across the top bars of the top box. Doing so, you are looking at the hive configuration you have in service for any evidence of environmental problems, factoring whether it's been a recent death or whether the hive has been dead for some time. As you're doing this, consider the state that you expect the colony to be in, meaning from a timing standpoint. If it's late winter, they're likely near the top of the box. But if it was early on, then maybe they're still down in the lower chamber and you're not going to see bees in this top box. Use your know-how and what you know about the hive to assess what should be going on and make any notes as to anything that presents differently from what you would expect. As you look across the top frames, take the time before you pull any frames to look down between the seams, and make sure you make any notes as to whether the remnants of the cluster are visible. As noted by this photograph, sometimes you're going to spot the dead winter cluster right on top of the frames, as evidenced by a clump of dead bees. Typically, though, you will spot the cluster as a clump of bees visible just below the tops of the top bars in between the frames. If you do find the cluster, you'll want to take pause and extract the frames in a specific manner. What I'm going to describe is what I'll refer to as the book approach. Walking you through the process, when you locate the cluster, do not disturb the frames that hold the cluster. They are the last ones to be pulled. Start as far away as you can from where the cluster is located and pull the frames up one at a time, inspecting whatever evidence they present to you as you go. Sometimes the cluster is on one side, and sometimes it's on the other, and other times, well, it can be right in the middle. Work your way through the frames until you have isolated those that hold the cluster, and then open them with the book approach. The way you do this is to pull the frames out of the hive body together and then separate them like you're opening a book. You've just pulled 2 frames up out of the box, keeping them together, and as you look through the seams, the cluster is in between. Take the 2 frames and lay them one side down on top of the box. There should be 1 frame lying over top of the other when you set them down. Now, keeping the tops together, pull the bottoms up like you're turning a page. When you are done, the top bars will be sitting adjacent to each other and the remnants of the colony will be visible for inspection. Now you're going to get a close look at the cluster as it spent its final days. Look for the queen. If she hasn't fallen off, she's generally in the middle, and you can look at the bees around her. You'll often find heater bees inside the comb, and everything often presents as they existed in their final moments of life. Sometimes it almost looks literally frozen in time. After you've taken your notes on the cluster, work your way through the remainder of the comb. Look for the information that presents, and also pay attention to the state of the honeycomb they had at their disposal. Here you're kind of getting a sense of the environment they called home and making a mental note as to if anything was substandard or amiss. One really important thing to take an extra moment on is any remnants of brood that presents. Anything that was interrupted, capped brood cells, brood in progress. You might even make notice of no brood in progress. You really have to consider how long the hive has been down though, and with that in mind, you can look for signs of illness presented through any of the brood looking off. Now, do note that sometimes decay is going to impact your ability to assess this, and there's not much you can do if the brood is mucked up from being there a long time. But whatever you can learn, try to make some notes of it. There is one thing from a brood pattern, though, that might be visible in the evidence. Colonies with high mite loads and high disease impacts that are sick, the brood areas may have clues to the disease that was rampant in the colony. A high toll that impacts a colony overall from varroa mites is sometimes termed parasitic mite syndrome. Again, keeping in mind how fresh the evidence is, if the death of the colony is recent and you find swaths of brood that look off, holes in the cappings, sunken cappings, dead brood that's twisted, grayish in appearance, dead bees under the cappings that are malformed, this could all stem from a heavy mite infestation. And, well, quite frankly, hives that die of varroa infestations, you might be able to spot this as you go along. Serving as a reminder, these are the specific items you would want to watch for and take notes on. What you find in the honeycomb is not unlike the police taking records at the crime scene. Also worth repeating is, do feel free to use a toothpick or some other tool to pull the cappings off and inspect the contents of the cells. Look for the presence of illness and do look to see if varroa mites are in with the dead developing bees. These next few slides are examples of some things you might find along the way. This is unripened sugar solution that has dried out in the winter months. It might be from a late feeding and the bees didn't have time to process it. This could contribute to fermentation problems and moisture problems from the water evaporating off during the cold winter days. If you see massive amounts of bees head in, this is an indication of starvation generally. This colony had a lot of bees to stay warm, but they had no food to use. Incidentally, I didn't want to go past this picture without you making a mental note of how the bees keep warm in the winter cluster. They go head into the cells. Bees will do exercise, generate warmth, and go in and transfer their warmth from cell to cell across the cell walls, and they'll also warm up the wax. Whenever you see thick wax plugged cells, sometimes this represents a resource that the bees entombed because they did not like what was in the cell. You can dig through to see what is underneath, and you might find pollen that the bees thought was contaminated, and they took the task to encapsulate it so no one could get to it. A key finding is the actual bees. It's an important clue. How they progress from life to death can often be assessed by the evidence that you find. Bees need numbers for the purpose of generating heat. They need a queen, they need enough bees to make it to spring, and they need food. So as you look at the bees, look at these relationships and see if you could find any problems in what was going on. As you look through the evidence, look for any signs of pest or predator interference. Keep in mind that the bees can defend their colonies, but some of the pest predator presence is not a sign that they killed the colony, but more of a sign that the colony could not stop an incursion, which is information to consider. It might seem odd to consider dead bees as a resource, but one thing to keep in mind is that varroa mites die right along with the cluster. You can take a collection of dead bees from the top, from the bottom board, and do a wash on them, and this is going to give you a sense of how many varroa mites were within the population. As noted on the last slide, do not miss the opportunity to check on the state of the bottom board. Comb through the remnants of whatever is collected on the bottom boards. There's often quite a bit of evidence when you look closely, but keep in mind how long the colony has been dead. The bottom board is the first thing to see an incursion from worms and spiders and other things. But chances are you're going to find a lot of dead varroa mites found on the bottom board, especially if you're running solid bottom boards. When you're all done, take your next steps for remediation. The next lesson is going to be on recovery, but you should Take the time to do a real-time inspection and follow that up with whatever offline assessment you intend to do. Comb through the evidence, and we highly suggest you take the time to study the photos and make conclusions. It's highly likely you're going to learn things to employ to correct whatever you found wrong as you put new bees back in your equipment. One thing to consider is conducting lab work on the evidence. This is beyond the scope of this presentation, but if you search, there are resources to guide you how to go about collecting the evidence and sending it in. You can scan this QR code and follow the address for the Beltsville, Maryland lab, for example, if you're interested. A little bit of a plug, there's a lot of overlap with this presentation, but if you want to go a little deeper, our presentation of how to do analysis with more details is available in this back episode of our Beekeeper's Corner podcast. Give it a listen if this is of interest and you want to learn a little bit more. This lesson closes our guidance on how to do a hive autopsy. There are chances that you'll find your way through and learn a couple things on your own as you do it, and that's perfectly suitable. Our next lesson is going to be about how to recover your equipment, put it back into service in spring so you can add bees back to the box. Following that, we'll do a short sideline on hive maladies, and when we clean that up, we're going to head into how to do swarm management. If you have any questions, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you at the next lesson.